School is in. But are you really ready to learn? Open your eyes to a new day in education with The Awakening Educator, a program specifically designed to explore a new, mindful way of educating our youth. Learn about social-emotional learning, new modalities of teaching, and the most relevant topics in education with your hosts, Susan Andrian and Megan Sweet. Susan and Megan will take you inside the issues by looking at them from different points of view, from policies and research to teaching models that are actually used in schools. There's never a dull moment in this classroom. You can catch The Awakening Educator every other Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern on Spreaker, Facebook Live, WDJY 99.1 FM, WTTA 101.2, Talk 10 FM, and many other platforms. You can also watch it on our app anytime from anywhere in the world at uimediaapp.com. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share. Call 678-495-4345 and share your thoughts live on air. Grab a pen and paper and get ready to open your textbooks and minds to a new way of learning on The Awakening Educator.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the UI Media Network. This is Megan Sweet.
And I'm Susan Andrian. Hello, friends at 99.1 FM WDJY.
Hello, friends from WTTA 101.2 in Kentucky and Ohio.
Welcome to Metro Atlanteans on Talk 10 FM.
And welcome especially to our guest, Dante King. We're so grateful to have you here today, Dante. We'll be checking with you today about the use of history in education, and especially in working with adults around developing their own race and cultural confidence and awareness. So we're really grateful that you're here today.
Yes, thank you, Dante.
Thank you.
So Dante, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your background?
Sure. So Bay Area, California, San Francisco, born and raised, native. I grew up partly in Oakland as well, attended school in the Oakland Unified School District, and then went on to continue education at Cal State East Bay. When I went there, it was called Cal State Hayward. That tells you how old I am.
A little timing yourself.
Yes. And so I attended both undergrad and graduate school there, and then went on to have a career in financial services. I just did some managing and banking on the retail and business banking side, small business banking. Then I worked in investment, but my educational background was primarily in African-American studies, ethnic studies. And then I did a graduate degree in education. And so while working in financial services, I did a lot of volunteer work and then some speaking, and would do presentations for different community groups. One in particular, the SMAC Youth Center, which was the Sexual Minority Alliance of Alameda County. And then just would volunteer to just do training and give presentations on the significance of the Black experience and just a lot of the things that have led to some of the common day outcomes that we see. And now I work for the City and County of San Francisco as the Director of Culture, Equity, and Employee Engagement.
For the city, for the city and the county, right? Because they're both the same.
Yeah.
Thank you for that, Dante. And as I was saying, the show, this first 4-part series that we're doing is on why history is an important thing for us to be paying attention to today. A lot of it came up for us around current events that are happening in the United States, but also the lack of knowledge people have of how some of our history is repeating itself. And so we're in this 4-part series, and you're our second of the 4-part series, and you're being pre-recorded so everybody knows. So we're recording you before part 1, but part 1, we're going to be interviewing Dr. Larry Cuban, who's been doing a lot of work on teaching history and why understanding history is important. And then we're really grateful to talk to you about some really practical applications of that beyond the classroom, but also for adults.
Yeah. And also really thinking about, I know that in the high school and the middle schools, history is still its own subject, but I think it often gets lost when we're thinking about how to incorporate into the elementary schools. And so that's really on the adults. I think sometimes the adults shy away from topics because they don't know how to manage their own feelings around it, which I think is related to the work that you're doing. So how do we help adults feel comfortable so that they can bring that into the classroom to the students they're serving?
Yeah. So what do you think, why do you think that history is such an important lever when we're teaching people about bias and oppression? We're going to start with a softball question.
Yeah,
just a light hard here.
Will this be the entire call? No. I think if we don't have a gauge on the things that inform us as a society, as just collective people, in our humanity, if we don't have a gauge on that, if we don't understand what's led up to this present moment and the influences, the both psychological and emotional, all of the structures that we have, our institutions, from private entities, corporations, government, the legal system, how those things are intertwined and the histories of those things. And even our religious institutions, like if we don't fully grasp that people they strategically manufactured everything that we see today, the ways in which we relate to each other, all of it, then we can't fully begin to address or confront those things that we see that interfere with us, that divide us, if you will, that make us different, or that we consider ourselves to be different by. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah, we have to understand how we see ourselves differently and why. And the biases that we have, the favorable biases, things that we have a lean or attraction to, and the things that we're necessarily ignorant about or just are unfamiliar with or uncomfortable with. We need to understand how all of that was set up, how it was set up for our parents, their parents, and so on and so forth. So.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm curious because I think one of the things you mentioned about how it's the systems, it's the structures, we're like swimming in it almost. It's hard to, it's the air we breathe. So wondering, what are some of the ways in which you help folks start to notice the ways that the system is set up? Like, what are some of the ways you help them recognize how they're sitting in that?
Yeah. So I take a very unique approach in doing it, which is rooted in a lot of peer-reviewed kind of research that I've endeavored in on my own, and just looking at some of the laws that were instituted early on that we don't necessarily visit with in our current day society. Like this information, I tell you, I don't think it's readily available or being shared with people. So if I can give an example of that.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we look back, I just have some notes here that I'm referring to. But if we go to, I believe it's, Act 10 of 1640, January 1640, there's a law in Virginia that's instituted, and the way that it reads is it says, all persons except Negroes to be provided with arms and ammunition or be fined at pleasure of the governor and council. And I share that because we know in our history that African people and African American people were enslaved. The significance of this law, what it speaks to are people who we would consider free Black people, who were not a part of the group of African people who were actually brought over on a ship, but people who were here, pre-existing. They could have been here from Spanish colonization earlier, but this is speaking to free Black people. And so we see earlier on in our history these rights being taken away from a group, and all other groups are, not included. They get to continue with those rights. And so if we think about just within a small window of maybe 10 years or so, and we look into that dynamic, what is it setting up? So these rights are being taken away from this group. Well, why? Well, we may not know why, but we know that they no longer get this privilege. And if I'm on the other side of that, I do get to continue to have this privilege. And it's my right. It's been my right all along. So those people who no longer get this right, maybe they did something to be in that predicament, but all is well over here. So if you just use that one example, and that's like almost 400 years ago, 380 years ago. Yeah.
So it's the idea from the beginning, the laws were set up to structurally move some folks into privilege and other folks out, and that those laws continue to be put on the books in ways that systemically.
Absolutely. And the other thing, though, that it did, too, is because during this time period, and one of the people that I refer to, Theodore Allen, then also in more current day, Jacqueline Badalora, she in her research talks about how the laws were also used to divide groups of people, because there were a lot of interracial relationships, interracial marriage. And so you see in 1630, there was this guy, Hugh Davis, and I don't know exactly what ethnicity he was, but he was of European descent. And they have it September 30th, 1630, Hugh Davis to be soundly whipped before an assembly of Negroes and others for abusing himself to the dishonor of God and shame of Christians by defiling his body and lying with a Negro, which fault he is to acknowledge the next Sabbath day. So they're using religion, they're using a legal structure to persecute this individual because he had sex with a Negro woman. And so the laws become, during the mid-17th century into the latter part, we see them becoming a lot more stringent. And, we go from, in my workshop that I give, and it can be anywhere from 3 to 5 days, depending upon how much time people have to yield to it. I go through the 17th, 18th, 19th century, and you see the laws just they're closing every loophole, to build this system of entire social, political, economic, religious, symbolic, spiritual, physical, and emotional control. It's really powerful.
Yeah, I really appreciate you naming that, Dante, and how, when you pull apart those threads and you start to see where they go back to, there are these really profound and I don't even have the right word for the shame of a nation that we have for doing something like that, right? That we're creating these structures. How do you connect that history to modern day? So if we use this example of having laws that people are going to be whipped and it's illegal to be in relationship with someone of color, particularly African American, how do you then connect that to where we're at today?
Yeah, and so just know we have about a minute before we're going to break, so we can pick it up afterwards. Yeah.
Okay. I try to make connections by having people look at some of the patterns that we see in society, and I can give more clarity around that when we come back from break. But particularly if we look at just the lack of regard that we may have for certain groups, we have a color dynamic. It's a spectrum of white and black, and then everything in between. And the darker you get in our culture, the less valued, the less valuable you are. And we can look to entertainment. We can look to, the people that we regard as the more prominently held people or recognized. Yeah.
So we're gonna take a break now, and we'll come back and pick up this thread. Thanks a lot, Dante. Looking forward to the rest of the conversation.
Thank you.
confidence. That's the key to unlock the door to unlimited speaking opportunities. The question is, do you have it? The answer is yes. But where to find it? Entrepreneur and public speaker Mark Stephen Pooler designed a brilliant speaker program to give you the blueprint to build confidence and become a genius entrepreneur and successful public speaker. In his 3-hour workshop, one-to-one or group coaching programs, you'll learn proven techniques, tools, and mindset development skills to help your career, business, or team to blast off into success. And to commemorate the launch of this phenomenal program, he'll be giving away a signed copy of his book, Tips to Create the Life You Desire, and a 1-hour coaching session. Simply visit www.markstephenpooler.com. That's Mark, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, Pooler.com. Press Yes, I Want to Move Forward, and type WIN to claim your gifts and your new opportunities with a brilliant speaker program. Don't miss out on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to get more speaking gigs, bring in more money, and create the life you truly desire. Confidence is everything. Don't be left with nothing.
Hi, welcome back to and on there you can find shows that have been pre-recorded and watch us live. So please get the app.
Yeah, and if you have any questions or you'd like to say hello, but today we're pre-recording, but normally you can give us a call at 678-495-4345.
Great. So welcome back, Dante. And I had the privilege of being in your workshop, and so I learned a lot and saw a lot in that space that I thought was really interesting. And so I'm really excited to talk with you a little bit more about how you take people through this experience of learning about history. And I guess I'm wondering, as you've been doing these presentations now with different people, what are some of the topics or the areas that you go into with your groups that they seem to be the most surprised about, the participants seem to be the most unaware of or shocked about as you start to unveil our history?
Yeah, I think the one thing, there are several moments that are very riveting. And I'll say three. There are three that I can point to. The first one being was that Black women were exempted from rape law, and so the legal structure made it okay just for over 250 years, roughly, for Black women to be raped, and that continued into the 20th century. And so what we see up until roughly the 1970s, I think, forget the name, I think her name was Betty Jean Owens. She's one of the first rape cases that happened in Florida, and this was roughly 1959. That was where someone was convicted, where people were actually convicted and brought to trial. But so what you have is, because that precedent is set 260 years, and it's normalized into culture, and again, coupled with or working in concert with the lack of regard that we have for Black women overall, just throughout history, is a recipe for the normalization of legitimizing rape, roughly. And what's interesting about that, though, is because if you look at white women were protected, particularly they made the laws extremely stringent for Black men, and you can look at this from state to state. So, for example, and I'll go to one or a few, if I may. So Kentucky in 1802, they had a code. It was a death penalty for rape of a white woman by a slave, and a term of years for rape by a white man. So white men always receive lesser of a penalty. In Virginia Code 1819 and the law of 1823, death for penalty of rape attempted by a Black, and then a Black or mulatto, and then a term of 10 to 21 years for rape by a white man. And typically what you would see in these cases, in antebellum cases, were white men getting, they would serve roughly maybe 2 to 3 years, if that. In many cases, they were acquitted. So it's setting up like this monopoly. I think the second thing that people are surprised about is the pervasive lynching that took place between the period of 1866 until roughly 1950s, in 1950s era, because what we see are these postcards, these copywritten postcards that we have as memorabilia that surfaced everywhere, with people smiling, pointing up at people who were hanging from trees, celebrating it, and they were sold in stores across the U.S. And I think the misnomer or misconception that people have is that these egregious things only happened in the South, and they happened everywhere. It was normalized, and so I point to some of the instances that happened in like Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota. And then I think the third thing is that people have this idea that, somehow whites and people of color and whites or Black people separated themselves, and, it became a situation of, Black people, because they were so disadvantaged, they got the lower end of the stick. And that's just kind of how things unfolded for them. And what we don't realize is that the federal government, all along, state by state, but then federally, institutionalized housing discrimination through, in the local courts, they upheld what are called restrictive racial covenants. And then state by state, city by city, county by county, you've got urban planning that comes along and issues surveys to find out where different races of people live, what the deed restricted areas are. And they begin to do create zoning ordinances by race, that certain races could not live in certain communities. And then you've got in 1926, the Supreme Court legalizing restrictive racial covenants that made it legal to discriminate, particularly against Black people, that they could not live or buy homes in certain neighborhoods. And then you have, and then 1934, 36 rolls around, and you've got the New Deal. And what they've introduced is the Fair Housing Administration, where they make it off limits. So I worked 20 years, almost 20 years, if you will, in banking. And so for those people who might have some history or some understanding around, buying a home, they made that first 80, the 80% that you can be approved for when you're purchasing a home through financial institutions, through banks, they made that off limits to Black people. And what they did through it was the Federal Housing Administration, they would not insure that first 80%. So banks virtually all across the nation could not loan to African Americans. If they did, it was at their own risk. 100% of that risk would be theirs to own if the loans were defaulted upon. And so what you have is a recipe, just strategically manufactured urban poverty developing, because that stayed in effect until 1977 when the Community Reinvestment Act came along.
I'm curious about, because, just listing all of those ways in which structurally and also the trauma inflicted on people, and wondering, when you're sitting in those spaces and giving people this really intense historical information, wondering how folks respond, both people of color who are maybe triggered around their own historical trauma and what's happened to them and their people, and putting it in context, but also people who are hearing this for the first time and maybe confronted with their privilege or confronted with guilt or shame that comes up. And how do you manage those emotional spaces so that people can take that content information you're giving them and transform the way they see themselves and the way they interact in the world?
Yes, those are such great questions. I think I use a variety of different techniques. I think the one that, because I'm a student in this arena as well, I think so there are certain things that I've learned to do throughout my career to just be available for people, to recognize that just at the base level of humanity, we all have feelings. We all see things through a different perspective, but it's a lot to reconcile with. And so I think the support is different based on one's experience with this information. If it's more, what I find particularly, it's hard for me to have other Black people in the room for various reasons, because we have been so robbed of understanding just factual information that have led to every reality that we see, not just 50% or 60 or 70%. And one of the things that I make very clear earlier on is when you, and this is the same, I make an analogy for women as well. This is the same for women. When you have your entire reality controlled for you through government, through, socioeconomically, politically, in every way, how can you really know what it means to stand in your identity when it's never been independent of anything. It's always been dependent on this framework that's been defined and redefined, and then we take it upon ourselves and we think we're redefining ourselves, but it's still rooted in that foundation. And so I think for African American people, it can be very emotional. There are moments of anger and hostility, but the outburst of the tears is what really gets me. Like, I'm getting emotional now talking about it, because it's a lot for me, because I can tell when people are getting it, and that is riveting. I had this one gentleman who had gone to jail, had served some time, and he was a Black guy, younger Black guy. He goes, "I thought all of this stuff began with Martin Luther King." I was so shocked, because I'm like, oh my God, we really don't know our history. I think supporting Black women, that's particularly hard, but, and I hope, I'm sorry for being so long-winded, particularly for white people though.
Yeah.
Okay. But for white people, I have gotten various reactions. I'll say for the most part, because it's the one thing that I do is I try to make it very collaborative. So people are talking to people. They're in pairs, they're in triads, they're in groups of four, all throughout, because it's got to be people hearing each other. And so I'm not, and Megan, you can speak to this. I'm not up lecturing so much, but I'm presenting information, and I'm, creating a framework and building an architecture for people to make connections to it, how they see fit. But I do think with the amount of information that's presented, people become very, they begin to acknowledge that, wow, okay, this is some type of inescapable, non-escapable escape route that we've been in, and it's all contrived. But I have had some people be very angry, and I know it's not necessarily me, but it's, to your point, they're making a connection they're being presented with something for the first time.
So we're going to be going to a commercial break again, but I really want to hear some more about, no, you're doing great. I really want to hear some more about the things you've been talking about here, anger and emotional state, when we get back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Looking forward to it.
Hi, I'm Tim Ray, founder of the United Intentions Foundation, where we offer resources and programs to help others awaken to the power of their intentions. One of the ways we get this great message out is through our UI Media Network, which is a platform for people to share their stories and wisdom on air on how they live a life with intent.
Hi, my name is Jennifer Kramer, and Tim and I united to create systematic change on a global scale. We realized that there were gaps in our educational system. Kids were going home every day being bullied, teen suicide was on the rise, and our Imagine-If education program helps students understand that they have the ability to create the world around them through their positive thoughts and inspired action.
As we become adults, we often forget how our imagination creates the world around us every day, and how our intentions and our actions from that imagination determines what we experience.
Our goal as a foundation is to use the money raised to offer it free to kids, parents, adults, other communities, other nonprofit organizations, and teach them that they have the ability to create the world around them.
We are so grateful to this incredible cast of paradigm shifters who are authentically changing this world on a global scale.
Hi, welcome back to The Awakening Educator with Megan Sweet and Susan Andrian. And today we have our guest, Dante King, and we've been talking with him about how understanding our history in the United States gives us a really important perspective on where we're at right now and what our world is looking like, especially in the United States. Before we get back with Dante, we want to remind you that you can connect with us online and follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube as United Intentions and Higher Intention on Twitter. And you can also connect with the Awakening Educator directly on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitter under the United Educator. Oh, shoot. Yeah. The United Educator, the Awakening Educator.
The Awakening Educator.
And you can connect with me directly on my Facebook page and my website at Your 3 Eyes. That's YOUR, the number 3, EYES.com. And you can get to me at Your 3 Eyes at Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter as well.
You can also purchase Megan's book on that site as well, and on Amazon as well.
That's right. Thanks, Susan.
And you can also catch us on United Media Network. We offer a host of advertising services, even if your budget's limited. So if you want a business to grow, call 678-495-4345 now and learn more about March specials not March specials. It's going to be April and May. For your own commercial.
Yeah, so welcome back, everybody. So Dante, before we went on break, we were talking about how when you're teaching these lessons, different groups of people have been having different reactions about the history, and we were starting to talk about white people and how their reaction might be showing up in the space with you, and I noticed that when I was in your training. And it's something that maybe as white people, it's often something we need to come to and become aware of is, just like all the rest of what's happening in our world and in the United States is stuff that's hard for us to see. I think often white people struggle to understand their privilege and see it. And it can be the struggle between like, but wait a minute, I'm poor and I'm divorced and I had a bad thing happen to me. Like, why is that not valid relative to other people? Often is an issue that comes up, or I hear a lot. And I honestly felt that way myself when I was really young. I was confronted with the idea that I was privileged because I didn't experience myself as being privileged. So it was a challenge. When I was in your training, what struck me was how surprised so many of my colleagues were, especially my white colleagues were, of the history of the United States and its impact. And I was less surprised because I taught history. So for me, I was like, yeah, I get it. And I've taught this to kids and I get, and not that it's not important. that I didn't know that it was important, but it just wasn't a surprise to me that was like, yeah, this is really important for us to talk about. And we have this big, long history that's really painful. But I saw some of my colleagues really struggling with that, both during the training and then afterwards. Just their worlds were really rocked and opened up in a way that they hadn't really encountered before. And so I just wondered, like, how you navigate that, and what are some things how do you kind of help people to work through that kind of awakening in that way?
Well, I think a lot of people have my cell phone number because of that. No, I really do try to extend myself, just even in conversation after, because people want to talk. So, I do some debriefs right after. And sometimes people have kept me until 8 o'clock just talking for 3 hours. Or, we process. But I also tell people that, I recommend certain books for people to endeavor into, and some documentaries that they can engage just to deepen or steepen the learning. But then also, for some people who are really committed to equity and, doing the hard work of confronting maybe how they participate, enable, or support bias systems that are grappling with making change, that it may even, like, I go to therapy and I recommend that for people. It's great to be able to talk some of this stuff over. I can't tell you. I know for myself, I'll say this, just in my endeavoring and doing the research for a number of years, it began to take a toll where I would have to take breaks because the weight of it was so heavy. I started getting depressed because, it starts out like you're doing a science project or a calculus problem. And you're like, okay, let me start. And you're putting this together. And then you begin to see you're like, I don't have the full total yet, but this is going somewhere. And it's leading me somewhere that maybe I don't want to go. And then you go further, you're like, oh my God, no. Because to see how calculated, I think the part that disturbs me most is that people had intentions and it was calculated. Yeah. So, I think that's what you were speaking to as well, Megan. And that can be hard because the other piece is that the closer we get when we're doing that march through history, the closer we get to current day, people begin to see their parents, they begin to see their family members, friends, themselves, teachers that they had, the neighborhoods that they live in. And I've had some white men come to me and say things like, so you just basically proved to me that there's no such thing as autonomy or, being an individual, or that it's all about hard work. And I'm like, I'm sorry to...
Pulling your boots up by the straps, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I'm like, you're absolutely right. That's a piece of it, but it is mostly all about opportunity.
Yeah.
And those have been kept from some people and available for others. So.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
I'm curious because I imagine, this kind of piggybacks on that question about what I've seen in doing this, in doing the work that I've done in Oakland schools for 20 plus years now. See a lot of people come and go.
Since you were 10?
You're sweet.
Dante.
But one of the things that I have seen is a lot of, and myself too, when I first got into this work, right, as a white woman doing this work, that there's the savior complex, right? Like what do you do with all this overwhelming information, right? You feel so sad, and then I want to save folks. And what I've heard from several of my colleagues is like, I just can't take one more white woman crying about this stuff, which has come up because there also is this imbalance in how folks are able to be sad about the material versus have to show up and be like, fight. or, all of those ways that who's allowed to be sad, who's allowed to be emotional, and who's not allowed to be emotional.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those things come up. I can't say that I fully understand the challenges that people have with anyone crying. I think if you don't cry during an experience like this, something's wrong. And, I have seen some people, not a lot, but some people go through it and they're not moved. And I can tell that they're just working really hard to suppress how they're feeling. Because I think with some of those individuals deep down, there's anger, right. Why are we doing this? But to your point, I encourage people to cry, but I also challenge people because I don't want those tears to be in vain, Right. So what are you going to do once you go from this experience? What's going to be different? And how are you going to allow this to move you into action?
Yeah. I appreciate that. This is something I brought up when we were in the training, and I think it's such an important part of what you're talking about, which is something that Glenn Singleton talks about too, right? Which is this idea, and Glenn Singleton has done a lot of really great work on helping people to learn to talk across race and difference, and he calls them courageous conversations. And he sorts it back to the same thing, and it's what I call in my book around insight, which is learning to know yourself and become aware of your own history and those biases that you're talking about, right? So we need to know that we're walking around with beliefs and biases that are there, and we need to come to some place of self-acceptance that they're there so that we can confront them and move through them. And so I think a really important part of what you do is you bring the information to light and help people start to understand their history a little bit. And there's various ways that you can go about learning more, right? You can do some of what Glenn Singleton talks about, which is writing like a racial autobiography. Some of them is going to trainings like yours and having conversations. And then also there's this ability then, and what you were saying came up for me is learning how to talk across difference in those spaces when you're confronted with that information. So I'm just wondering what are some of the questions or activities or ways that you support people to start to talk across difference or talk about these subjects when they're in the space, having the feelings, these moments are coming up, they're being confronted with stuff. How do you help us to start to have those conversations right there? Or what are some of the things that you do?
And just know we only have about 2 minutes before our next break. So I don't know that we can answer that question in 2 minutes, but I think we might be able to get it started. Yeah.
Okay. So I use a lot of discussion questions, and I have people start reflecting on what's their relationship, their personal relationship, their family's personal relationship to the history as we're just kind of trekking along. And then how is it impacting them emotionally, mentally, and physically? So we do some check-ins. And then I also have several activities that I yield to toward the end where people start naming who's included in their social circle. And I have them actually write a list earlier on. They don't know how they're going to use it, but they just write down maybe 8 to 10 names of people that they're friends with, that they're close with. And then by the time we get to the second or maybe third day, I have them add other identifiers to those people. And it's a real eye-opener because people go, I'm trying to defend it. Well, no, I have other people on my list that I'm with. It's not just this. What is this saying? What does this mean? And what I try to lead people to understand is that this is not a good or bad thing. This is about, we all have preferences. And this is where most of your what you lean toward. This is what you're more comfortable with. Not that you're not comfortable or uncomfortable with anyone else, but you're more comfortable with this. And that means something. I can go into that after though.
Yeah. And I just want to follow up on what I meant a little bit before because we're going to break. around just really thinking about how people need to be responsible for their own emotional state. So I agree. I really want folks to cry, but then how do we do what Megan was talking about in her book, to do our own work so that when we show up to those conversations, we're being responsible for our own emotional state.
Yeah. So I think it's interesting to think about. And what came up for me too, maybe we can talk about it later, is self-acceptance.
Self-acceptance, yeah. We'll be back in a few minutes.
With all of life's stressors, it can be challenging to stay balanced and healthy. Hemp-derived cannabinoid, or CBD, supplements such as Plus CBD oil are becoming well recognized as a key supplement to optimize wellness. By working directly with our own internal system that maintains homeostasis, the endocannabinoid system, CBD, can help restore the body's natural rhythm when we need it the most. Learn more about Plus CBD oil and how to balance the system that balances you from www.pluscbdoil.com. That's www.pluscbdoil.com.
Download the UI Media Smart app at uimediaapp.com to watch and listen to all your favorite shows anytime from anywhere in the world. Shows that enrich, entertain, educate, and feeds the conscious cells throughout your body. We bring you never-heard-before topics in health, inspiration, music, psychics, numerology, current affairs, controversies, and much, much more. So what are you waiting for? Visit www.uimediaapp.com and start raising your frequency now.
Hi, and welcome back to The Awakening Educator with Megan Sweet and
Susan Andrian.
We're also on Binge Networks TV. Visit us at bingenetworkstv.tv and look for UI TV under channel 12783. Our channel is also featured on Apple TV, Google Play, Roku, Amazon Fire, and more. And just look for The Awakening Educator.
I can't believe that we're already in our last segment of The Awakening Educator. It's been an amazing social so far, and we have our last segment with Dante. Dante, because we're a show about education, one of the things that we're really interested in is if you have pieces of this history, because the history is really long, you have a 5-day workshop. What are some of the key pieces that you think educators should bring into the classroom, both on an elementary school and middle school? How would we bring this in? And what are some key things that teachers need to be really thoughtful about around their own understanding of the history?
I think thank you for the question. Speaking to the, and you said this word earlier, but the traumas that were endured generation through generation, because when we begin to look at the significance of the conditions that the majority of people were in, and what that led to, and how that shaped just different cultural realities. It's connected to a lot that's just compounded by additional things that go on. And I think once we can create a full picture when we teach history in our schools, and rather than isolate one particular incident, because what that does is it reduces the actual fullness and scope of things to give understanding to maybe why we have high incarceration in Black communities, or why there are Black people who are in poverty, or there are healthcare disparities, and we link that to like intergenerational trauma, and we talk about like maybe how one thing I hear or have heard in my life is that Black people are so aggressive. And there's truth to that. Absolutely. Black people are so emotional. Absolutely. But then on the other hand, white people are not for the most case. And I think we need to look at that, because one of the things that I have begun to really name and also unpack for myself and because I'm doing I'm calling my studies anti-Blackness studies, is that you can't be part of this group called white men or white people and decade after decade rationalize and justify intentional harm in a variety of ways, through rape, through other means of brutality, and then come out on the other end and not be affected. And so even when I look at some of the white people that go through the training and they're like so, kind of stoic or just have it together, not all, but some, I'm going, this is indicative of this dynamic, because it's almost like there's no empathy, there's no ability to really feel for this other group. And I think we've all, to a degree, been socialized that way, where we can see certain things happening to human beings and not care. And that's, I think, something for our humanity to begin to unpack as people.
Well, what comes up for me when you say that, and I wonder what you think. So it's one of the theories that I've come to on my own, but also come across in different works, such as John Powell's work and others on understanding implicit bias and how it shows up. Is I feel like so much of it is that we can't even face within ourselves those biases and those, so while it looks stoic on the outside, it's like it's almost like
it's dissociated.
It's dissociative. It's like a refusal or an inability to acknowledge that bias exists within us, and that we need to come to a place of self-love and self-acceptance so that we can face those parts of ourselves that we're not proud of, and that are causing harm, that until we can get to that point, we're going to keep pushing it away because it's just too hard to look at and hard to see. So I'm just wondering what you think about that. I mean, I've heard it, John Powell talks about that a little bit around, like, we all need to accept and understand that we are influenced by bias all the time, every single one of us. The biases or the stereotypes we have about any one ethnic group not only affects the people that aren't in that ethnic group, it affects the self-identity and kind of how people understand themselves within that ethnic group. Or for women, if there's all the suppression that we've had for women, it'll show up by how men treat women, but also how women see themselves and interact with one another. And I'm just wondering how you think about that interplay between bias and self-identity and how they show up.
I think, you basically said it. I agree. I love John Powell's work, Julie Nelson, the work that they've done together. I think that it depends on one's identity. It's like when I look at certain groups, take Black people, for instance, like we always have to consider our place in society, in every environment, whether it's employment, education, just socially. But if I'm, let's say I'm Donald Trump, I don't have to care. And I don't have to care about anyone. I'm sitting on top of the world, so I have no reflecting to do. Get this out of my face. I don't have to do it. That's an entirely different perspective on life. So it just really depends on people's motivation and where people want to go with it. I do think it can be really, really, really hard when you look at history and peel back the layers, and then you find that maybe if you are in a privileged position, that's all been built up for you, because it turns your identity on its head or on its ear. And it turns maybe what you learned about your family and your family's history on its ear. If you look at the Head Rights Acts that we talk about from 1619 to 1779, and then the Homestead Acts from 1862 to 1976, people got free land. And it had nothing to do with, I got here and I just worked really, really, really hard and created a fortune for my family. It was all, hey, we won and I've heard some white people say this in like middle America, we won the culture war. So this is our inherent right. That's really what it boils down to.
Yeah. I'm curious, how do people come to your workshop? Like, where do they, are they volunteer? Do they find it and sign up for it? Are they volunteering, or are agencies asking you to come in and do this work?
Yes. So I typically will be solicited or contracted through an agency. Most recently, I had been working through the city and county of San Francisco on a contract to do this work with the police department. So we spent roughly 3 years training, if you can imagine, law enforcement officials, and then extended the work to some other city departments. So I partnered with the Department of Transportation, but I have been solicited through other external agencies. I've done some workshops in Los Angeles County, and then here in Contra Costa. I'm going to do more work with Oakland Unified, and then I'm hoping to do some work within the UC system. I'm crossing my fingers, because I'm in the middle of applying for a grant. Anyway, so yeah, if there's anyone that would like to solicit my services, I'm more than willing to make them available and go to any jurisdiction that would like this type of experience.
And go ahead.
How do they find you?
Sorry. My website is Dante at DanteKing.com. So that's Dante, my first name, DANTE, at Dante King, DanteKing.com. And I'm sorry, that's my email. Duh. That's my email. My website is www.danteking.com. www.danteking.com.
Okay, and we'll be sure to link your website from the Waking Educator Facebook page.
Yeah, so we'll connect it there. And are people able to schedule different lengths of time with you, or is there a prescribed amount of time that you recommend folks spend on exploring this? Do you recommend it fits within a larger construct within an organization? What's the best way to utilize what you have to offer?
I recommend 3 full days. We can break them up, but not too far apart. But I can do, I've done even down to a day. And then people say, oh, no, we need day 2 and day 3. So you can even come and do like a half day overview. If people just want to understand what the work is. I also just give my phone number out too. It's 510-928-8185. Again, that's 510-928-8185.
Great, and people can check in with you. That's wonderful.
Yeah. So we have our next guest is Nicola Berlinski. We're super excited to hear about the work that she's doing in LA. Around history with her students in performing arts. So she's going to be coming up in our next episode in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And
2 weeks after that, we're going to be talking with some of Nicola's students and parents who go through one of her history lessons, so we can learn about both this history lesson that she has, but then also the impact on the students and really helping them to develop their understanding. As we're wrapping up here, we want to give our usual thank yous and gratitudes out to everyone. So thank you to everybody at the UI Media Network for helping to put on this show. And thank you to my co-host, Susan.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome.
Thank you, No Small Children, for making your music available for our theme song.
Thank you to our families, our kids, and Susan's husband.
Yes.
For their support. Thank you, Dante, for taking the time out of your day to join us. We really deeply appreciated your time.
Right. This is a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you
so much.
And if you need to get in contact with us, again, you can find us at UI Media Network on Facebook and on Instagram. You can find me at Your 3 Eyes, YOUR3, the number 3, EYES.com, and learn about how to get my book, everything else.
All right.
Thank you.
Class is dismissed. Wasn't that fun? Susan and Megan are always happy to greet you on the next episode of The Awakening Educator, every other Friday at 4 p.m. Eastern. Watch all our shows anytime from anywhere in the world at uimediaapp.com. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and Spreaker at United Intentions to be up to date with the show. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share. Email us at contact@unitedintentions.org, and we will read your comments live on air. Education is the foundation for a brighter future. Open your eyes to the Awakening Educator, only on the UI Media Network. The United Intentions Foundation and its associates take no responsibility for the opinions and statements made by the talk show hosts or their guests.